There is a moment that repeats throughout history, usually unnoticed at the time, when people begin to rely on a system they did not consciously choose. No announcement is made, no authority declares it into existence. It simply becomes easier to comply than to resist, safer to trust than to stand alone. By the time anyone asks who is in charge, the answer is already embedded in daily life, in prices, routes, habits, and expectations. Medieval Northern Europe experienced one of those moments long before anyone had the language to describe what was happening. After the collapse of Roman order, power fragmented into pieces that rarely fit together. Lords ruled land they could not fully secure, kings claimed authority they could not consistently enforce, and laws lost their meaning once they crossed a river or coastline. Violence was common, but reliability was rare. For people who lived by farming, this instability was tolerable. For people who lived by exchange, it was existential. Trade depends less on strength than on predictability. Knowing that a contract will be honored matters more than knowing who technically rules the territory. Unpredictability was exactly what medieval Europe lacked. Merchants faced a problem that no crown was seriously trying to solve. Goods could move, but trust could not. A shipment of grain or timber was valuable only if it arrived intact, was paid for as agreed, and could be sold without arbitrary interference. Yet every leg of a journey introduced uncertainty. Tolls appeared without warning. Officials changed their minds. Pirates didn't recognize charters. Courts favored locals over foreigners. Each transaction carried not just economic risk, but personal ruin. And still, trade continued, because the rewards outweighed the danger. That imbalance created pressure, and pressure has a way of producing structure. The earliest response was not coordination, but caution. Merchants gravitated toward routes and ports where outcomes were more predictable, even if they were not officially safer. Over time, certain towns developed reputations not for power, but for reliability. Deals were honored there, disputes were settled without violence. Storage was secure, information flowed. These places attracted more merchants, which made them even more valuable, which encouraged local authorities to protect that reputation. Wealth followed consistency, and consistency became a form of influence. What emerged was not an organization in the modern sense, but a shared logic. Merchants learned that their greatest vulnerability was isolation. A lone trader could be extorted or ignored. A group could not. Without formal agreements, without centralized leadership, merchants began behaving as if they were part of something larger. They synchronized departure times. They shared news of hostile regions. They extended credit based on reputation rather than proximity. None of this required permission. It required only repeated interaction and aligned incentives. As these behaviors spread, cities began adapting to them. Local rulers discovered that protecting foreign merchants brought revenue without conquest. Granting privileges to trading communities made ports busier and treasuries fuller. In trying to attract commerce, cities unintentionally reinforced the same standards merchants were already enforcing among themselves. Rules began to look similar across distant regions, not because they were imposed, but because deviation became costly. A city that refused to play along did not need to be punished directly. It was simply avoided. This is where power quietly shifted. Influence no longer depended on who could command obedience, but on who could shape options. Merchants did not need to overthrow authorities. They needed only to decide where trade would and would not flow. Over time, this decision-making became collective by default. If enough participants withheld cooperation, the outcome was unavoidable. Shortages followed, prices spiked, political pressure mounted from within. The mechanism was subtle, but the effect was decisive. What later generations would call the Hanseatic League was less an institution than a pattern of behavior that proved extraordinarily durable. Its strength came from its informality. No single city controlled it. No ruler could dissolve it. Participation was voluntary, yet exclusion was devastating. Trust functioned as currency, reputation as enforcement. A merchant who violated shared norms did not face imprisonment, he faced irrelevance. In a world where survival depended on access, that was punishment enough. This network eventually extended far beyond the awareness of most people living under it. Goods passed through hands that never met. Prices adjusted in response to decisions made hundreds of miles away. Political leaders found themselves negotiating not with rivals, but with abstractions, with groups that had no single voice, but spoke clearly through coordinated action. The absence of visible authority made resistance difficult. There was no palace to storm, no throne to seize. Power had diffused into routines. At its height, this system demonstrated a truth that unsettles traditional views of history. Control does not require ownership of land. It does not require flags or titles. It requires the ability to make participation conditional, as long as access to trade, credit, and information could be granted or denied collectively. Formal sovereignty became negotiable. Kings remained powerful, but only within the constraints imposed by the networks they depended on. Eventually, those constraints changed. States learned to centralize, to standardize law, to project force consistently across territory. New trade routes diluted old advantages. What had once been adaptive became rigid. The network did not fail so much as lose relevance. Its decline was gradual, almost polite, because it had never been a single thing that could collapse, yet its legacy remains uncomfortable. It reveals how easily power can emerge from cooperation without conspiracy, from incentives without ideology. It shows that systems we trust often arise not from design, but from repeated choices that feel individually rational and collectively irreversible. And it reminds us that the most influential forces in history are often the ones that never announce themselves. If you want to explore more stories about how money quietly shaped power and belief over time, you can subscribe for future reflections.